The wind was sharp that afternoon, cutting through the quiet of the cul-de-sac. Yellow police tape fluttered like a warning banner, stretched across the driveway of a home that, until a few hours earlier, had been the picture of suburban peace. The kind of house with manicured hedges, a freshly painted front door, and the faint smell of jasmine drifting from the garden in the evenings. Now the jasmine mixed with the metallic tang of blood, though only the officers and paramedics stepping in and out of the front door knew it. A black Mercedes sat crooked in the drive, its driver's side window shattered. The shards glittered under the low winter sun, scattered like tiny diamonds across the concrete. Beside it, a single stiletto heel lay on its side, abandoned in a rush. Inside the house, muffled voices carried from the kitchen. Investigators moved carefully, gloved hands bagging evidence, cameras clicking quietly, flashes bouncing off stainless steel appliances and pale marble counters. Neighbors stood in clumps across the street, whispering behind hands, eyes darting between the front door and each other. Most had lived on this street for years. They'd wave to Michael Arlen as he jogged past in the mornings, his earbuds in, his polite nod always the same. They'd seen his wife, Anna, tending to the flower beds, sometimes with her mother beside her. They'd noticed the mother, always dressed sharply with hair perfectly set, and had assumed she was simply a stylish older woman enjoying her retirement. No one guessed she could walk into this house on a Thursday afternoon and leave it soaked in tragedy. Inside, Detective Harris stood by the kitchen island, studying the scene. A half-finished cup of coffee sat cooling beside a laptop, its screen frozen mid-email. The ceramic mug was streaked with a fingerprint smudge that would later be matched to the woman police had already begun searching for. The body lay on the tiled floor, carefully shielded now from view, but the spatter on the lower cabinets told its own story. The shots had been close, deliberate, not the work of someone panicked. The killer had known where to aim. In another corner of the room, an officer quietly consoled Anna, her face blotched red, her voice nearly gone from screaming. She had been the one to find him, sprawled where he fell. Her mind could barely wrap around the words she had spoken when she called 911. She'd said her husband was dead. She hadn't said, not then, not yet, that she thought her own mother had done it. That truth was too large to fit into her mouth. Michael Arlen was not the kind of man who collected enemies. At 38, he had built a software company from the ground up, turning late nights and risk into a steady business that allowed him and Anna to live comfortably. He was the man who donated to local schools, sponsored the neighborhood's youth soccer team, and covered the bill for friends when they forgot their wallets. His friends knew him as generous almost to a fault. That generosity had extended to Anna's family too, especially her mother, Celeste. Celeste Vance, 57 years old, was as much a fixture in Anna's life as the house she grew up in. Widowed young, she had never remarried, never seemed to want to. What she did want, and what she never stopped wanting, was a life wrapped in luxury. Her nails were always fresh from the salon, her clothes stitched with designer labels, her vacations chronicled in glossy photographs with perfect lighting. People assumed she had some quiet fortune, some old family trust. In truth, her bank account had been kept afloat for years by the man now lying lifeless on the kitchen floor. By the time the coroner arrived, the questions had already begun to stack higher than the evidence bags. Why would a mother kill her daughter's husband? Why here in broad daylight, without even trying to hide her presence? Was it rage, desperation, or something colder, more calculated? The detectives didn't need to guess about the last part. They already knew Celeste hadn't come here in a blind fury. She had parked her car a street over, walked to the house with a large leather tote, and left with the same tote, its shape subtly changed. In the distance, the rumble of a news van joined the low hum of the crime scene. The story would be everywhere by nightfall. Headlines heavy with shock, neighbors replaying every interaction they had ever had with the family. But here, on this polished stretch of flooring, under the harsh white light of the kitchen, the truth already felt heavier than any headline could hold. This was not the aftermath of a random break-in. It wasn't some accident born of misunderstanding. This was the endpoint of a long, unseen line. A line woven through years of quiet transactions, unspoken resentments, and a belief on Celeste's part that money owed to her was not a gift, but a right. And when that flow stopped, when Michael said no for the first time, She didn't argue her case. She ended his. No one could have guessed it when they saw her walking up to the door that day, designer sunglasses catching the light, her smile the same one she'd worn at birthdays and Christmas dinners. But that smile would be the last thing Michael ever saw. And the moment the shots rang out, the life they had all been living, the dinners, the garden parties, the carefully kept peace, shattered as completely as the glass now crunching under the feet of the officers at work. In the days to come, every detail of Celeste's life would be peeled back under the glare of investigation. But on that cold afternoon, all anyone knew was that the man who had once believed kindness was always worth the cost, had just paid the highest price of all. Long before her name became attached to a crime scene, Celeste Vance had been a girl who understood the currency of appearance. She grew up in a small, weathered house on the outskirts of town, where money was scarce and pride was stitched together with hand-me-down clothes and carefully guarded stories. Her mother worked long hours at a sewing shop, her father on and off construction crews. There was never much left after the bills, but Celeste hated the way poverty clung to her. Even as a child, she would linger outside the boutique on Main Street, pressing her face to the glass, studying the mannequins draped in silk and pearls. She didn't just want the clothes, she wanted the life that came with them. In school, she learned quickly that charm could be as valuable as any skill. She was the girl who could talk her way into invitations, who somehow found herself at pool parties in the wealthier neighborhoods despite living miles away. She learned how to watch people, how to mirror their words, adopt their interests, make them feel seen. It wasn't about friendship as much as it was about positioning herself closer to the things she thought she deserved. By the time she turned 18, Celeste had grown tired of making do. College wasn't part of her plan, not because she lacked the ability, but because it lacked the guarantee of glamour. Instead, she drifted toward older men with steady incomes. Men who could introduce her to restaurants with cloth napkins and hotels where the lobby smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. Relationships were never about love for her. They were investments, and she measured their worth by the gifts they gave and the doors they opened. When she met Richard Vance, she was 24 and working as a hostess at a high-end steakhouse. He was 15 years older, a widower with a quiet demeanor and a comfortable salary from his job in finance. Richard wasn't flashy, but he was stable, and stability was a luxury Celeste had never tasted. She married him within the year. The wedding was small, but she made sure the dress was custom, the photographer expensive, the honeymoon on a private beach. Richard paid for all of it without complaint, and Celeste took it as confirmation that this was the life she was meant for. For a while, she played the part of the content wife. She kept their home immaculate, hosted small dinner parties, smiled politely at his colleagues. But contentment for Celeste was always temporary. She began to push for more: trips abroad, a larger house, a newer car each year. Richard obliged until the request began to stretch beyond what he could justify. Arguments followed, though never loud enough for neighbors to hear. Celeste would retreat into silence, punishing him with cool detachment until he gave in. When their daughter Anna was born, Celeste poured her energy into shaping her into someone who would never know the kind of scarcity she had endured. She dressed Anna in designer children's clothes, enrolled her in private dance lessons, and spoke often about the importance of marrying well. She didn't teach her about careers or independence. She taught her about presentation, about making herself desirable to the right kind of man. Richard's sudden death when Anna was 16 shifted everything. A heart attack took him in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. The insurance payout covered the mortgage for a while, but it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle Celeste had curated. She sold the house and moved into a smaller condo, but the cutback stung. She kept the clothes, the jewelry, the habits, even if it meant credit card debt mounting quietly in the background. Anna's transition into adulthood became Celeste's new project. She watched with keen interest as her daughter began dating in college, always steering her toward men who looked like they could afford more than just dinner and a movie. When Anna met Michael at a charity gala, Celeste recognized the opportunity before her daughter did. She noticed his watch first, understated, expensive, then his shoes, polished to a mirror shine. His easy laugh, his attentive way of listening to Anna, were bonuses. Celeste's approval was immediate and enthusiastic. From the beginning, she inserted herself into their relationship, offering advice on everything from home decor to vacation spots. When Michael and Anna married, Celeste smiled for the photos in her couture gown, the kind most mothers of the bride would never dream of buying. Michael's success meant Celeste didn't have to temper her wants anymore. She started small, dinners on his tab, shopping trips that ended with him carrying her bags. Then came bigger asks, help with her rent, contributions toward a new car, funding for once-in-a-lifetime trips. Michael rarely said no in those early years. He treated Celeste like family, and in his mind, family helped each other. But Celeste didn't see his generosity as kindness. To her, it was a natural extension of her worth, a confirmation that she was entitled to the same comfort her daughter enjoyed. Every gift, every transfer of money, every bill he covered reinforced the belief that this was not charity. This was her due. In the quiet moments when she sat alone in her high-rise apartment sipping imported champagne, Celeste would scroll through travel blogs and luxury catalogs, thinking of the next thing to add to her list. She had built her life around acquiring, around upgrading, and she had no intention of slowing down. She had survived her childhood by convincing herself she was meant for more. And now, with Michael's resources, she had the proof in her hands. The idea of losing it, of going back to less, was something she never allowed herself to imagine. When Michael first began helping Celeste, it was never meant to be permanent. He saw it as a way to ease the burden on Anna's mother, a kindness extended to the woman who had raised his wife. Covering a few bills here and there felt natural, even right. He told himself it was just until she got on her feet, just until she found her own rhythm after years of living on her own. Celeste was gracious in those early days, offering effusive thanks, sending texts with little heart emojis, telling friends how lucky she was to have such a thoughtful son-in-law. The spending began subtly. A spa voucher for her birthday, a surprise shopping trip while Anna and Michael were visiting her downtown, dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city, where Michael picked up the tab without hesitation. He liked seeing Anna happy, and Anna seemed happiest when her mother was content. To him, the cost was a small trade for peace. Over time, the pattern deepened. Celeste stopped treating the gestures as surprises and began to expect them. She dropped casual hints about handbags she'd seen or trips she wanted to take, her tone light, as though she were mentioning the weather. Michael often obliged, not wanting to seem stingy. He didn't see it as enabling, he saw it as generosity. Anna noticed the shift before he did. She saw the way her mother's apartment transformed, the luxury furniture replacing the older pieces, the closet filling with silk blouses and Italian shoes. She also saw the growing stack of delivery boxes from boutiques and designers that never offered discounts. Celeste never talked about budgeting or restraint. She talked about what was next. What had once been gifts became obligations. Celeste would call Anna in the middle of the week, asking her to remind Michael about the rent transfer or the spa renewal. If the money didn't arrive on time, she'd follow up with a sharp, clipped message that carried the weight of disapproval. Her request grew bolder. She wanted a newer car because the old one didn't fit her image. She suggested a trip to Paris in the spring because life is too short to wait. Michael's business was doing well then, so he rarely refused. He was proud of what he'd built, proud that he could provide for his wife, and by extension, her mother. He didn't see the danger in it. To him, money was a tool, and using it to keep harmony in the family seemed like the right thing to do. The turning point came quietly. A contract that should have been signed in January was delayed until summer. Two other deals fell through unexpectedly. Revenue dipped, not dangerously, but enough for Michael to notice. He began trimming expenses where he could. Anna supported the idea, though she hesitated when the topic of her mother came up. Celeste was used to a certain standard now. Asking her to scale back would be like asking the tide not to come in. They tried small adjustments first. Instead of luxury resort stays, Michael suggested local getaways. Instead of covering the full cost of her rent, they offered to help with part of it until things improved. Celeste reacted with cool politeness, her voice smooth but distant. She began visiting less often, her text messages shorter, more transactional. Friends noticed the change in her tone when she spoke about Michael. She still praised his career to strangers, But in private conversations, she began to hint that he was tight with money, that he didn't understand the importance of living well. These comments were delivered with a laugh, but underneath was a thread of resentment. The more Michael pulled back, the more Celeste seemed determined to push forward. She arrived at their home with glossy brochures for exotic cruises and private tours, laying them on the kitchen counter as if she were presenting necessities rather than indulgences. She spoke in terms of we, as though it were understood that Michael would be part of funding them. When Anna suggested her mother try working part-time to cover some of her own costs, Celeste brushed it off with a wave of her hand. She said she was too old to start over, that she'd paid her dues raising a daughter and deserved to enjoy her life now. Her definition of enjoyment, however, had no ceiling. Michael began to feel the strain. It wasn't just about the money, it was the way it was expected without gratitude, the way it no longer felt like helping, but like paying dues to avoid conflict. The more he thought about it, the more he realized Celeste had built her entire lifestyle around his wallet, and that realization carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Still, he said nothing directly. He knew confrontation would put Anna in the middle, and he didn't want to force her to choose. Instead, he began drawing quiet lines in the sand, declining certain requests, suggesting more affordable alternatives, letting some hints go unanswered. Celeste noticed every one of these shifts. Her smile thinned, her warmth cooled, and though she didn't say it outright, a new tension began to hum beneath every interaction. It was in this space, between generosity and resentment, between expectation and refusal, that the first cracks in the family's fragile balance began to show. Celeste had spent years climbing into a life that wasn't hers, and she had no intention of stepping down. Michael, for the first time, was beginning to wonder how much longer he could hold her there. It was a gray morning in early March when the tension that had been quietly building finally tipped over. The kind of morning where the sky looked like brushed steel and the air smelled faintly of rain. Michael was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through invoices on his laptop, when the doorbell chimed. Anna was upstairs getting ready for a lunch meeting, so he answered. Celeste stood there, smiling as if she had just returned from some glamorous weekend away. Her hair was perfectly styled, her coat a deep emerald wool that looked brand new. In her hand was a neat folder, the kind travel agents use for itineraries. I brought something for us to look at, she said, stepping inside before he could respond. The scent of her perfume, sharp and floral, filled the air as she laid the folder on the counter and opened it with a practiced flourish. Inside were glossy pages for a European river cruise, private suites, balcony views, champagne dinners under the stars. Michael glanced at the images and knew instantly this wasn't going to be a light conversation. He closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. It leaves in June, she said, tapping a manicured finger against the page. 2 weeks, all first class. I thought we could book now before the best rooms go. He chose his words carefully. It looks incredible, Celeste, but right now isn't the best time. Business has been slower, and Anna and I are trying to scale back for a bit. Her smile didn't falter at first, but something behind it shifted. A flicker of surprise, maybe even disbelief. Scale back? She repeated, as though the phrase were foreign. You've always said experiences are worth investing in. They are, he said gently. But we have to be realistic. I can't commit to something like this right now. Maybe we can plan a shorter trip, closer to home. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was heavy. She closed the folder slowly, her movements precise, almost theatrical. When she looked at him again, the warmth in her eyes had cooled. I see, she said, her tone smooth but edged. I suppose some people think small is enough. Michael didn't rise to it. He had learned over the years that responding to her subtle jabs only made them sharper. It's not about thinking small, he said. It's about timing. Let's talk again in a few months. She gave a small laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. A few months, right. Then she gathered the folder and slipped it back into her bag. I'll let you get back to whatever it is you're doing. Anna came down just in time to see her mother leaving. She looked from the front door to Michael, reading the tension on his face. What happened? Your mom wanted us to book a big trip, he said, keeping his voice even. I told her now's not the time. Anna sighed. I'll talk to her. That night, while Michael was in the shower, Anna's phone buzzed with a string of messages. Celeste's words were wrapped in a tone that seemed light-hearted at first glance, but carried an undercurrent of accusation. He's gotten so careful with money lately. I hope this isn't a sign of things to come. You deserve more than just getting by. Men who pinch pennies usually pinch in other ways too. Anna didn't respond immediately. She knew that once her mother started down this path, the comments would keep coming, each one a small push, an attempt to make her see Michael as ungenerous, even selfish. She deleted the messages before Michael could see them, telling herself it was to avoid a fight, but the weight of them sat in her chest. Celeste, meanwhile, relayed her version of the exchange to a friend over cocktails the next evening. He thinks he can cut me off just like that, she said, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. All I've ever done is support them, and this is the thanks I get. If he wants a war over a few $1,000s, he'll get one. Her friend tried to steer the conversation towards something lighter, but Celeste was already in motion. She had built her life on knowing how to get what she wanted, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not even her daughter's husband, tell her no. The refusal had landed like a slap, and she carried it with her, turning it over in her mind, letting it harden into something colder than disappointment. In Michael's world, it had been a simple boundary, a necessary adjustment during a slower season. In Celeste's world, it was a betrayal, a disruption to the order she had carefully arranged. For the first time since Anna married him, Michael had stepped outside the role she had assigned him. The provider, the enabler, the man who understood that her happiness was worth the price. She didn't argue with him that morning. She didn't raise her voice or demand an explanation. Instead, she left with a smile that was almost too calm, the kind of calm that hinted at something still and deep beneath the surface. And as she drove away, her hand steady on the wheel, she began to consider just how far she was willing to go to make sure no one ever denied her again. The weeks after that morning moved like a slow tide, steady on the surface but with a pull underneath that neither Michael nor Anna could fully ignore. Celeste didn't confront them again about the trip, but her absence began to speak louder than her presence ever had. She skipped Sunday dinners without explanation, answered calls with clipped responses, and sent short, polite texts that felt nothing like the ones she used to write. When she did see them, her smile seemed carved in place, her compliments coming a beat too late, as if she had to remind herself to sound warm. Michael noticed the distance and at first welcomed it. He thought maybe space would help her adjust to the changes, that the coolness was just her way of settling into a new normal. But Anna could read her mother better. She knew silence from Celeste was rarely surrender. It was calculation. She had seen it before, in arguments over boyfriends, in fights with relatives, even in the way Celeste handled sales clerks who told her an item was sold out. She never raised her voice in those moments. She planned. What neither of them knew was that Celeste had already started watching them more closely than they realized. She learned Michael's daily rhythms, when he left for the office, when he came home, when Anna was usually out. She noticed that on Thursdays he often worked from home alone. She didn't write any of this down. She kept it in her head, turning it into a private map of opportunity. In quiet hours at her apartment, Celeste began clearing out her own debts. She sold off small pieces of jewelry she didn't wear, transferred money between accounts, and told friends she was getting organized. When one of them asked if she was moving, she laughed and said she just liked to be prepared. She also bought a gun. It was a small revolver, nothing flashy, purchased from a shop 2 neighborhoods over. She told the man behind the counter that she lived alone, that she wanted something for protection. Her voice was light, her smile practiced. He showed her how to load it, how to clean it, how to store it safely. She nodded, listening politely, but her mind was already elsewhere. The gun fit easily into the large leather tote she carried most days. Meanwhile, Michael was doing his best to keep the business afloat and his home life steady. He didn't tell Anna the full extent of the financial slowdown. He just said things were a little tight for now. He figured the less she worried, the better. He didn't want her feeling caught between him and her mother any more than she already did. Anna, though, couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. She had seen her mother angry before, truly angry, but this felt different. It wasn't a spark, it was a slow burn. Celeste didn't pick fights, but she also didn't let go. Anna tried to bridge the gap, inviting her over for coffee, sending her photos from their weekend hikes, asking about her plans. Celeste responded kindly enough, but there was a hollowness in her tone, as though she were already living in a place where they no longer existed. One afternoon, Anna stopped by her mother's apartment unannounced. The place was spotless, almost staged. No dishes in the sink, no magazines on the coffee table. Celeste was dressed as if she were about to go out, though she claimed she had no plans. The only thing out of place was the leather tote on the armchair, its handles stiff and upright, as though something heavy rested inside. Anna didn't ask. The real fracture came 3 weeks after the trip conversation. Michael told Celeste over the phone that they couldn't cover her full rent for the coming month. He spoke gently, explaining that they would still help, just not at the same level. On the other end of the line, she was silent for so long that he thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost too calm. "I understand," she said. "You have to do what's best for you." There was no argument, no request for more time, just those words, and then a polite goodbye. Michael hung up thinking it had gone better than expected. But Anna, when she heard about it, felt the same weight she had felt the day of the crew's refusal. She knew her mother well enough to hear what wasn't being said. From that day forward, Celeste stopped pretending to be hurt or distant. She was simply polite, agreeable, and always brief. She didn't linger in conversation, didn't offer more than was required. To the outside world, it might have looked like she was moving on. Inside her mind, she was moving toward something else entirely. In the evenings, she would sit by her window, the city lights scattered like jewels below. She thought about what she deserved, what she had built her life toward, and how quickly it could all be taken if she allowed someone else to dictate her worth. To Celeste, Michael wasn't just saying no to a trip or a rent payment. He was threatening the foundation she had spent decades building. And once Celeste believed something was hers, she didn't give it up. Not to strangers, not to friends, and certainly not to family. The morning of the killing began without anything unusual to mark it. A soft, overcast light filled the streets, the kind that makes colors appear muted, almost delicate. Michael was at home, settled at the kitchen table with his laptop open, a steaming mug of coffee at his side. Anna had left early to meet a friend for brunch across town, the sound of her car pulling away lingering in his mind only as a familiar rhythm in their routine. The house was still, the kind of stillness he found productive. He answered emails, made notes for a meeting later in the week, and thought only about work. At 10:47 a.m., the doorbell rang. He looked up from the screen, expecting a delivery driver or perhaps a neighbor. Through the glass panel, he saw Celeste. She stood straight-backed, wearing her usual polished look, hair perfectly brushed, makeup light but flawless, sunglasses catching the pale light. Over one arm hung her leather tote, its weight making the strap dig into the shoulder of her emerald coat. She smiled when he opened the door, her tone casual, almost breezy. "I was nearby," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Anna left some papers with me. Thought I'd drop them off." Michael gestured toward the counter. "You can set them here." She moved into the kitchen like she had 100 times before, her perfume trailing after her. She placed a single manila envelope on the marble, then lingered, glancing at the coffee pot. "Mind if I pour myself a cup?" "Go ahead," he said, turning back toward his chair. She filled a mug slowly, her eyes on him more than on the coffee. "How's work?" He looked up, gave a small shrug. "Keeping busy?" Her mouth curved into a smile that didn't quite match her eyes. "I imagine it's hard to focus with so many things on your plate." He nodded, not catching the undercurrent. "It's been a bit of a stretch, but nothing we can't handle." There was a moment of quiet as she sipped. Then she set the mug down carefully, both hands flat against the counter. "You know," she began, her voice low, "I've been thinking about our last conversation." Michael's posture stiffened slightly, but he kept his tone calm. "About the rent?" "About a lot of things," she said, "about respect, about how people show it or don't." He drew a breath, preparing to keep the discussion civil. "Celeste, this isn't about respect. We've just had to make some adjustments." She tilted her head, watching him as if she were weighing something invisible. Adjustments, she repeated, the word rolling slowly off her tongue. He stood then, partly to signal the conversation was over, partly to create space between them. Anna will be back soon. We can talk about this with her here. She reached into her tote. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. For a brief second, he thought she was pulling out more papers or perhaps a phone. But when her hand emerged, it was holding a revolver, small but heavy-looking, the barrel already aimed at his chest. Michael's eyes widened, confusion overtaking any instinct to move. Celeste! The first shot cracked through the stillness, echoing off the tile and glass. He staggered backward, a sharp gasp escaping as his hand went to his side. The second shot came almost instantly, sending him to the floor. His coffee mug toppled, brown liquid spreading in a thin stream toward the edge of the counter. She stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the tile. She looked down at him, her face unreadable, then bent briefly to open a drawer. Her hands moved with the familiarity of someone who had been in the kitchen many times before. She took an envelope stuffed with cash, slipped it into her tote, then unclasped his watch from his wrist. The gold caught the light as she dropped it into the bag. Michael tried to speak, his voice faint, but she didn't respond. She adjusted her coat, picked up her coffee, and took one last sip before setting the mug neatly in the sink. When she left, she didn't rush. She walked down the driveway, the tote steady at her side, and turned the corner where her car was parked on a different street. Within minutes, she had merged into the steady flow of late-morning traffic. Back inside, the house was silent, except for the soft drip of coffee from the counter to the floor. The laptop screen still glowed with the unfinished email he had been writing, the cursor blinking patiently. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, a sound no one would later connect to the moment Michael's life had ended. Celeste drove straight to a boutique across town. She parked in the back, near the dumpsters, and dropped the revolver into one of them without looking. Then she went inside for her scheduled spa appointment, arriving a few minutes early. The receptionist greeted her warmly, unaware that the scent of her perfume now lingered in a house marked with death. It would be nearly 2 hours before Anna returned home, calling out for her husband as she stepped through the door. She found him in the kitchen, still, the coffee spill long dried beside him. Her scream filled the rooms, loud enough to bring neighbors to their windows, loud enough to break the fragile stillness that had held since Celeste walked away. Anna's voice was raw and frantic on the 911 call, each word tearing out of her as if speaking them made them more real. The operator tried to steady her, but the sound of panic and grief bled through every syllable. She knelt on the cold kitchen floor beside Michael, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't tell if the dampness on her skin was from the coffee stain or the blood pooling beneath him. His eyes were half closed, his breathing still, and she knew, even before the dispatcher told her help was on the way, that there would be no saving him. When the paramedics arrived, they moved with efficient urgency, but the first glance between them told the truth. He was already gone. One of them gently guided Anna away, leading her into the living room where the air felt different, as though the walls themselves were absorbing her sobs. The rest of the team stayed behind, voices low, the sounds of zippers and Velcro straps blending with the faint hum of the refrigerator. The police came next, their uniforms sharp against the muted colors of the home. Detective Harris introduced himself, his tone measured, professional. He asked Anna to walk him through her day. She told him about brunch, about the drive home, about the way she found Michael. She mentioned nothing of her suspicions. Not yet. The thought that her mother could have done this was a shard in her mind she couldn't touch, without cutting herself. Outside, the scene began to swell. Yellow tape stretched across the yard. Neighbors stood at the edges, whispering to each other, their voices carrying just enough to let Anna know they were trying to make sense of what had happened. A news van rolled up, the cameraman stepping out with his lens already uncovered. The story had escaped the house and was beginning to crawl into the rest of the city. Inside, the detectives moved from room to room, taking photographs, dusting for prints. The kitchen became their anchor point. One officer bagged the coffee mug, another cataloged the cash drawer, now conspicuously missing its contents. When the doorbell camera footage was pulled, everything shifted. The image was clear. Celeste standing at the front door smiling, tote on her arm, timestamped just after 10:45 a.m., minutes before Michael's death. Detective Harris played the clip for Anna in a quiet corner of the living room. Her face drained as she watched it, a single tear slipping down her cheek, not from surprise, but from confirmation. She whispered almost to herself, I thought, I thought she might, and then stopped, her voice breaking. The investigation moved quickly from there. Officers traced Celeste's phone records, matching her location data to Michael's address at the exact time of the killing. Traffic cameras caught her car turning onto a side street near the house just before the doorbell footage. Another camera captured her leaving, her route taking her past the boutique where, hours later, a dumpster would yield the revolver wrapped in a silk scarf. Ballistics matched it to the bullets found in Michael's body. By the following morning, a warrant had been issued. Detectives found her at her apartment, sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten croissant and a neatly folded newspaper in front of her. She didn't resist. She didn't even look surprised. When Harris told her she was under arrest for the murder of Michael Arlen, she nodded once, almost like she had been expecting it, then calmly extended her wrists for the cuffs. News of her arrest spread fast. The headlines were blunt, the contrast between her polished public image and the crime almost too sharp to believe. Some of her friends refused to accept it at first, insisting there had to be some mistake. Others, the ones who had known her longest, fell silent, their minds drifting to moments when her charm had slipped, when her smile hadn't reached her eyes. Anna didn't attend the arraignment. She couldn't bring herself to see her mother in that setting, couldn't reconcile the woman who used to braid her hair with the one accused of killing her husband. She stayed at home, surrounded by friends who kept the television off and the blinds drawn. Celeste's booking photos circulated online by the afternoon. Her hair was slightly out of place, her makeup less precise than usual, but she still carried the same composure. It unsettled people, the absence of panic, the absence of remorse. If anything, she looked bored, like the whole process was a formality to be endured rather than a reckoning for what she'd done. Back at the crime lab, technicians pieced together the physical evidence. The watch taken from Michael was found in her apartment, tucked inside a drawer alongside receipts for expensive clothing purchased in the days before the murder. The envelope of cash was recovered too, though some of it had already been spent. The case was airtight, but it wasn't just the evidence that made it strong. It was the motive that bound it together, the slow erosion of a benefactor's generosity, the refusal that cut deeper than pride, the decision that someone else's boundaries were worth crossing at any cost. By the end of the week, the story had become a cautionary tale repeated on morning shows and crime segments. A mother-in-law killing her daughter's husband over money wasn't just rare. It was almost too cold, too calculated to fit the usual narratives. But here it was, unfolding in plain detail, with no room left for misunderstanding. In the quiet of her cell that night, Celeste lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. The world outside was rearranging itself without her, but she didn't cry, didn't pace, she simply waited, as if there were still some part of the game left to play. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, the kind of scent that clung to its marble corridors no matter the season. On the first day of the trial, the air inside the courtroom was heavy with a mix of curiosity and dread. Reporters filled the benches in the back, their notepads ready, cameras waiting outside for breaks. Locals had lined up early, drawn by the strange, grim fascination of a mother accused of killing her daughter's husband. Celeste entered wearing a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled into a low chignon. The chains around her wrists had been removed before she came in, replaced by the stillness of her folded hands. She walked to her seat with the same posture she had always carried, upright, almost regal, as if the courtroom were just another stage where she was expected to perform. Anna sat on the opposite side, behind the prosecution table, her shoulders stiff and her eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't spoken to her mother since the arrest. The prosecution began with a quiet, methodical outline of the case. They spoke of financial dependency, of years of support that had shifted from generosity to expectation, and of the moment that expectation was denied. They showed the jury the doorbell footage, Celeste standing at the threshold with Betrayal with her tote, and then the traffic camera stills, the dumpster where the revolver was found. Each image was projected on a large screen, the grainy clarity leaving little room for doubt. The defense tried to soften the edges. They painted Celeste as a woman under pressure, a widow who had given her life to her daughter and simply snapped in a moment of desperation. They spoke of her grief after Richard's death, of the loneliness she masked with travel and fine things. They hinted that perhaps Michael had been cold, dismissive, that he had humiliated her when he refused to help. But when pressed for evidence of that, they had none. Only speculation and the hope that sympathy might blur the facts. Witnesses were called one after another. Neighbors described seeing Celeste's car near the house on the day of the murder. A boutique employee recalled her arriving for a spa appointment, looking completely calm just an hour later. The ballistics expert confirmed the revolver was the murder weapon, its serial number traced to a sale made to Celeste weeks earlier. When Anna took the stand, the room seemed to shrink. She spoke in a steady voice, though her hands twisted in her lap. She recounted the morning she found Michael, the shock of seeing her mother in the doorbell footage, and the months leading up to the killing, the constant requests, the slow tension. When asked directly if she believed her mother had killed her husband, she paused for a long moment. Then she said yes, the word breaking in the middle. Celeste watched her daughter as she spoke, her face unreadable. She didn't flinch at the accusations, didn't glance away. Only once, when Anna stepped down from the stand, did her eyes follow her with something like recognition, though whether it was regret or simply acknowledgement was impossible to tell. The defense tried to undermine Anna's testimony, suggesting her grief had clouded her judgment, but the prosecution countered with hard evidence. They replayed the doorbell footage and pointed to the timestamps, aligning them with the exact moment Michael stopped responding to emails. They detailed the contents of the leather tote, the stolen cash and watch, the silk scarf wrapped around the revolver. They reminded the jury that Celeste had not called for help, had not acted in self-defense, had simply walked away. By the time closing arguments came, the narrative was clear. The prosecution described a woman who had lived her life believing she was owed more, who had built her comfort on someone else's earnings, and who chose murder when that comfort was threatened. The defense asked for understanding, for the jury to see a flawed human being rather than a villain, but the facts left little room for redemption. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, a folded slip of paper in his hand. The clerk read the verdict aloud. Guilty of first-degree murder. The words seemed to hang in the air, absorbing the room's collective breath. Anna closed her eyes, her hands pressed together in her lap. Celeste sat still, her expression unchanged, as though the decision had been inevitable from the start. Sentencing came a week later. The judge, a measured man with a calm voice, acknowledged the tragedy of the case but made no attempt to soften his words. "You took a life in cold blood," he said. "You did so not in defense, not in fear, but in anger and entitlement." He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As deputies moved to escort her out, Celeste glanced once toward Anna. There was no plea, no apology, only a look that might have meant anything or nothing at all. Then she was gone, her steps echoing down the corridor, swallowed by the courthouse's heavy silence. Outside, the press crowded around the steps, shouting questions no one wanted to answer. Anna slipped out a side door with a friend, the wind tugging at her coat as she stepped into the gray afternoon. The trial was over, but the story, the wound it had cut through her life, would remain. Somewhere in the city, the house where it had all happened still stood, the kitchen tiles scrubbed clean, the scent of coffee long faded, but the memory of that day etched into every surface. In the weeks after the sentencing, the world outside seemed to keep its pace while Anna's life slowed to something unrecognizable. The days blurred, marked only by the rhythm of quiet mornings and restless nights. She avoided the kitchen when she could, not because she feared what she might see there, but because she remembered too clearly what she had already seen. The countertop gleamed now, the coffee maker replaced, the floor scrubbed until every trace of that morning was gone. Yet the air in the room still felt different, heavier somehow. Friends checked in often at first. They brought groceries, stayed for tea, filled the silence with soft conversation. But as the weeks stretched into months, the visits grew fewer. People have their own lives to return to, and grief, as Anna learned, is often endured in solitude. She stopped correcting the way they spoke about her mother. When someone said, "I'm so sorry for your loss," she would simply nod, knowing they meant Michael, but avoiding the truth that she had lost her mother too, though not to death and not in a way anyone could really mourn aloud. Michael's absence was felt in small, unexpected ways. The quiet hum of his car in the driveway at the end of the day, the sound of him typing late at night while she read in bed, the way he always filled her coffee mug before his own. She kept some of his things untouched. His watch, the one taken from him that day, and later returned by the police, rested in its box on the dresser. His favorite sweater still hung in the closet, smelling faintly of him. She told herself she'd pack them away eventually, but not yet. Not until she was ready to believe he wouldn't walk back through the door. The trial had left her drained, but it had also made her sharper. She replayed moments in her head, the ones where she had dismissed her unease about her mother, the ones where Michael had tried to draw boundaries. She saw now how small decisions, the ones that felt too minor to matter, had stacked up, how they had built a path that led to a doorbell camera capturing her mother on the last day of his life. That knowledge didn't bring closure. It brought a kind of quiet resolve. Celeste wrote to her twice from prison. The letters were neatly written, the handwriting elegant and deliberate. In the first, she spoke of the food, the routine, the women she had met inside. She did not mention Michael's name. In the second, she wrote about the view from the small window in her cell, a sliver of sky she watched every evening, and asked if Anna might visit. Both letters ended the same way. "I know you don't understand now, but you will someday." Anna placed them in a drawer without responding. Life moved in uneven steps. She sold the house a year later, unable to shake the feeling that it had been permanently altered, that its walls knew too much. She moved into a smaller apartment downtown, one where the kitchen faced a busy street and the sound of passing cars kept the quiet at bay. She changed her routines, joined a book club, started running in the mornings. None of it was about forgetting wasn't possible, but about building a life that wasn't anchored entirely to what had happened. Occasionally, she would see her mother's name in the news again, usually in a short article about prison programs or case studies in criminal psychology. The reporters always mentioned the murder in a clipped sentence, as though it were a single event rather than a long unraveling. Sometimes people would connect the name and ask if she was that Anna. She learned to answer with a polite yes and nothing more, leaving no room for the curious to pry. On the anniversary of Michael's death, she visited the small park where they used to walk on Sunday afternoons. She brought no flowers, no tokens, just herself and the memory of him. She sat on their favorite bench, watching the light shift through the branches, and thought about the years they were supposed to have. The life they had built was gone, but the love they shared had not vanished with it. It lived on in the spaces between memories, in the quiet strength she carried now. Some nights, when the city outside her window had gone still, Anna would think about the chain of choices that had led here. Her mother's hunger for more, Michael's generosity, her own hesitation to confront what she feared might be true. It was tempting to imagine a different path, one where the conversation about the trip ended with laughter instead of gunfire. But she knew that imagining it wouldn't change the reality. Celeste would spend the rest of her life in a cell. Michael would never come home. And Anna would go on living, not because she had found some perfect peace, but because life in its quiet, relentless way demands to be lived. She never visited the prison. Not once, Mom. The letters stopped after 2 years, the last one arriving without a return address. Just a brief note in her mother's familiar script. "I hope you're happy." Anna folded it, placed it with the others, and closed the drawer. Outside, the city lights blinked against the dark, steady and unbothered. She stood by the window, watching them, and let the stillness settle around her. The past would always be there, a shadow she carried, but it was no longer the only thing in the room.